The invisible hand. The last important decision you made, buying that car, accepting that job offer, ending that relationship. What if it wasn't really your decision at all? What if someone else planted it in your mind so skillfully, so subtly, that you never questioned whether it came from you or from them? Richard Thompson sat in his corner office on the 40th floor, staring at the city below without really seeing it. 52 years old, CEO of a mid-sized consulting firm, married for 23 years with 2 kids in college. By every measure the world uses to judge success, Richard had made it. But something had been bothering him for weeks now, a nagging feeling he couldn't shake. His company had just signed a contract worth $3 million with a vendor he'd met only 6 months ago. The terms weren't great. Actually, they were slightly worse than their previous arrangement. But somehow, during those negotiations, it had felt like the right move. The vendor had been so reasonable, so understanding of Richard's concerns, always finding ways to reframe the downsides as opportunities. Then yesterday, Richard ran into an old business school classmate who'd worked with the same vendor years ago. They're masters at it, his friend had said casually over drinks. They make you think every idea was yours. By the time you realize you've been led exactly where they wanted you, the contract's already signed. Richard went cold. He replayed every conversation, every meeting, every collaborative decision they'd made together. The vendor had never pushed, never demanded, never even suggested directly. But somehow, Richard had walked away from every interaction thinking he'd come up with the solution himself. He'd been played, and he'd never even noticed. You're probably thinking that would never happen to you, that you're too smart, too aware, too careful to fall for manipulation. Richard thought that too. He had an MBA from a top university. He'd negotiated hundreds of deals. He prided himself on his analytical thinking. But here's what most people don't understand about advanced influence techniques. They don't target your intelligence. They target something deeper, something that operates below your conscious awareness. The psychological mechanisms that drive your decisions before you even realize you're making them. Every single day, forces you cannot see are shaping the choices you think you're making freely. Not through mind control or hypnosis, nothing that dramatic. Through tested, proven techniques that governments, corporations, and master negotiators have been refining for decades. These aren't the obvious manipulation tactics you've heard about. The guilt trips, the gaslighting, the emotional blackmail. Those techniques are amateur hour compared to what we're about to explore. The 5 psychological influence tactics you're about to discover are invisible precisely because they don't feel like manipulation. They feel like your own thoughts, your own realizations, your own decisions. That's what makes them so dangerous and so effective. Think about the last time you bought something you didn't really need. Maybe it was that streaming service subscription, or that kitchen gadget that promised to change your life, or that premium option you didn't plan to choose but somehow ended up purchasing anyway. Was it really your idea? Or were you guided there through a carefully constructed path of small yeses, artificial scarcity, and social proof you never questioned? These techniques aren't just used in business. They're in your relationships, shaping dynamics you think developed naturally. They're in your workplace, influencing who gets promoted and who gets overlooked. They're in your community, determining which causes you support and which you ignore. They're woven so deeply into the fabric of modern life that most people never stop to examine them. But you're different. You're here because some part of you suspects that your choices aren't as free as they feel. You're here because you've had that uncomfortable moment of looking back at a decision and thinking, why did I do that? You're here because you're ready to see what most people never will. In the next 90 minutes, You're going to learn exactly how these invisible systems of control operate, not the manipulation tactics that obvious abusers use. We're talking about the professional-grade influence techniques that shape behavior without triggering resistance. The methods that work precisely because they make you feel like you're in complete control the entire time. You'll discover how a simple 2-minute conversation can lock you into commitments that grow exponentially without you noticing until it's too late. How your brain's wiring makes you susceptible to following crowds that don't even exist. How someone can create a sense of obligation so powerful that you'll give them far more than they ever gave you, even when you never asked for their help in the first place. You'll learn why the first number you hear in any negotiation determines the outcome more than any logic or reasoning that follows. And you'll understand how manufactured urgency hijacks your decision-making process, making you act when you should be thinking. This isn't theory. This is the invisible architecture of modern persuasion, used by those who understand that true power lies not in forcing compliance, but in engineering consent. By the time you finish listening, you won't just understand these techniques. You'll be able to spot them instantly in yourself and others. You'll recognize when someone is using the foot-in-the-door phenomenon to escalate your commitment. You'll see through artificial social proof designed to make you follow imaginary crowds. You'll identify reciprocity traps before you fall into them. More importantly, you'll develop the AWARE framework, a systematic approach to protecting your decision-making autonomy that works even when you're tired, stressed, or caught off guard. Because here's what Richard learned after that conversation with his friend. The opposite of being manipulated isn't being paranoid or suspicious of everyone. It's being aware. It's understanding the techniques so thoroughly that they lose their power over you. It's making decisions from a place of genuine choice rather than engineered compliance. This is not about becoming cynical or assuming everyone is trying to manipulate you. Most people use these techniques unconsciously, without even realizing what they're doing. But whether intentional or not, the effect is the same. Your choices become less yours and more theirs. Your mind is your most valuable asset. Your ability to make decisions that actually serve your interests, your values, your goals, that's what determines the quality of your entire life. And right now, that ability is being compromised in ways you haven't recognized yet. The invisible hand has been guiding you. It's time to see it for what it is. Chapter 1. The Foot-in-the-Door Phenomenon. How Tiny Yeses Lead to Big Commitments. Linda Chen had worked at the same marketing firm for 12 years when her colleague Marcus approached her desk one Thursday afternoon. He looked stressed, overwhelmed by a presentation due the next morning. "Linda, I know this is last minute, but could you just take a quick look at these slides? Maybe 5 minutes? You're so good at catching mistakes." Linda glanced at her own deadline looming that afternoon, but 5 minutes wouldn't hurt. She was a team player after all. That's what good colleagues do, they help each other. "Sure, send them over." Those 5 minutes turned into 45, as she found herself not just proofreading but restructuring entire sections that didn't quite flow. Marcus was grateful, genuinely so, and Linda felt good about helping. The next week, he was back. "You saved me last time. Could you look at this proposal real quick? I value your input." Again, she said yes. Then it was client research that would only take 20 minutes. Then brainstorming sessions for his projects. Then covering his meetings when he had conflicts. Within 3 months, Linda was spending 10 hours a week on Marcus's work. Unpaid, unacknowledged, slowly cannibalizing the time she needed for her own projects. When performance reviews came around, Marcus got promoted for his exceptional output and client management. Linda didn't. Her own projects had suffered, deadlines missed, quality declining. She'd been so busy building his career that she'd dismantled her own. And when she finally confronted him, Marcus seemed genuinely confused. "But you always said yes. I thought you wanted to help." He wasn't lying. She had always said yes. That first 5-minute favor had locked her into a pattern she couldn't escape without feeling like she was betraying her own identity as someone helpful, reliable, consistent. She'd given him her foot, and he'd walked right through her door. This is the foot-in-the-door phenomenon in action, one of the most devastatingly effective influence techniques ever documented. The principle is elegantly simple and terrifyingly powerful. Get someone to agree to a small request first, and they become far more likely to agree to much larger requests later. What starts as a trivial yes becomes a cascading series of commitments that grow exponentially without you noticing until it's too late. Understanding how this works requires looking at one of the most famous experiments in social psychology. In 1966, psychologists Jonathan Friedman and Scott Fraser conducted a study that would change our understanding of human compliance forever. They approached homeowners in California with two very different requests. The first group was asked directly if they would allow a large, ugly sign reading, "Drive carefully," to be installed on their front lawn. The sign was massive, poorly designed, and would completely obscure the view of their house. Predictably, only 17% agreed to this ridiculous request. The second group was approached differently. 2 weeks before the big request, they were asked to display a tiny 3-inch sign in their window, supporting safe driving. Almost everyone agreed to this trivial favor. It was harmless, took no effort, supported a good cause. Then, 2 weeks later, these same homeowners were asked about the large lawn sign. The result? 76% agreed. The exact same ugly sign that 17% of people accepted when asked directly was accepted by 76% of people who had first agreed to the small request. That initial tiny yes had quadrupled compliance for a request most people would normally reject outright. This isn't about logic or rational decision-making. This is about something much deeper in human psychology, a principle Robert Cialdini would later identify as commitment and consistency. Once we take a position, make a choice, or publicly commit to something, even something small, we feel tremendous psychological pressure to behave consistently with that commitment. Our brains are wired to see ourselves as consistent people, and contradicting our previous actions creates cognitive dissonance, a deeply uncomfortable mental state we'll do almost anything to avoid. When Linda agreed to that first 5-minute favor, she wasn't just helping Marcus with slides. She was establishing an identity. I am someone who helps Marcus. Every subsequent request wasn't evaluated independently. It was filtered through this self-concept. Saying no would mean admitting she wasn't actually that helpful person, that her previous yeses were meaningless, that she'd been inconsistent. For most people, maintaining self-image as consistent is more important than protecting their time, energy, or even career prospects. The neuroscience behind this is fascinating and sobering. When you make a commitment, your brain begins constructing a narrative that justifies that decision. This isn't conscious. It happens automatically in the same regions that process self-identity and social belonging. Each subsequent yes reinforces this narrative, making it progressively harder to say no without experiencing psychological pain equivalent to threatening your sense of self. Evolution wired us this way, for good reasons. In tribal societies, consistency was survival. If you promised to watch someone's children, or share food, or defend the group, people needed to trust you'd follow through. Inconsistency could get you ostracized, which in ancestral environments meant death. Your ancestors who felt compelled to honor commitments, even small ones, were more likely to maintain social bonds and survive. But in modern society, this evolutionary adaptation has become a vulnerability that skilled manipulators exploit with surgical precision. The foot-in-the-door technique has been refined across industries, optimized through decades of A/B testing, embedded into sales scripts and negotiation tactics and organizational cultures. It's not always malicious. Sometimes people use it unconsciously, genuinely unaware they're escalating your commitment step by step. But the mechanism is the same, whether intentional or not. Consider how this plays out in the digital age. You sign up for a free trial of a streaming service. Just your email address, no credit card required, completely risk-free. That's the foot in the door. 3 days later, you're asked to add a payment method to unlock premium features. But you can cancel anytime. Still feels safe, still feels like your choice. 2 weeks in, you've created playlists, saved favorites, started a series. Now canceling means losing all that investment. A month later, the trial ends and billing begins. But you barely notice because you've already committed to the service, to the shows you're watching, to the identity of being someone who uses this platform. The initial ask was trivial. The final commitment is a recurring monthly charge you'll probably keep paying for years. And at each step, it felt like your decision. James Morrison fell into a different version of this trap, one that cost him not just money, but nearly a decade of his life. At 52, James attended a free financial planning seminar advertised at his gym. Just an educational evening, no pressure. Learn about retirement strategies. The speaker was charismatic, knowledgeable, made everything sound so simple and achievable. At the end, attendees were offered a free one-on-one consultation. Why not? It was free, and James genuinely wanted to plan better for retirement. During that consultation, the advisor asked James to commit to just one thing: attending a weekend workshop on investment fundamentals. It cost $300, but compared to his retirement nest egg, that was nothing. James agreed. The workshop was impressive, full of people who seemed smarter and more financially savvy than him, all nodding along to strategies that promised 7% annual returns with minimal risk. By the end of the weekend, James had agreed to invest $15,000 in the firm's managed portfolio. It felt reasonable after 2 days of education, social proof from other attendees doing the same thing, and the mounting sense that he'd already invested time and $300. Walking away now would mean admitting he'd wasted both. Over the next 5 years, James invested another $120,000 across various products the firm recommended. The returns were mediocre. The fees were astronomical. And when he finally had his portfolio independently reviewed, he discovered he would have made more money in a basic index fund. But each investment had felt like a logical next step after the previous one. He'd already committed to this firm, this strategy, this relationship. Changing course would mean admitting he'd been wrong from the beginning. This is how cults recruit members, how multi-level marketing companies trap distributors, how employers get employees to accept unpaid overtime that becomes the expected norm, how relationships turn slowly abusive without the victim noticing the shift. The pattern is always the same. Small initial ask, agreement. Slightly larger ask, agreement. Escalation, escalation, escalation. By the time you're in deep, looking back at where you started feels impossible because you can't pinpoint the exact moment when helping out occasionally became doing someone else's job, or when trying a business opportunity became losing your savings to a pyramid scheme. Sarah Kim experienced this in her personal life, with devastating consequences. She started dating someone who seemed perfect at first, attentive, thoughtful, respectful of boundaries. 3 weeks in, he asked if she'd mind skipping her weekly dinner with friends just once because he'd planned something special. It was a small request, romantic even, and Sarah happily agreed. The next month, he mentioned feeling a bit uncomfortable with how much time she spent with her friend Rachel, whom he found overly dramatic. Could she maybe see Rachel a bit less, just to keep things peaceful? Sarah loved Rachel, but relationships require compromise. She agreed to monthly dinners instead of weekly. 6 months later, Sarah had stopped seeing most of her friends entirely. Her boyfriend hadn't demanded it. Each decision had felt like her choice, small adjustments to maintain harmony. But without her social network, she had no perspective when his requests became controlling, his criticisms became constant, his compromises became unilateral demands. When she finally recognized the relationship as abusive and left, Sarah traced back the path and found that first seemingly innocent request: skip dinner with friends just this once. That was the foot in the door. Everything else had followed naturally from her commitment to being a good partner who compromises and accommodates. You might think you're too smart to fall for this. Linda had a master's degree in marketing. James was a successful engineer. Sarah was a lawyer. Intelligence doesn't protect you from psychological principles that operate below conscious awareness. In fact, highly intelligent people often fall harder because they're better at constructing elaborate justifications for why each escalating step was actually rational and necessary. The technique works precisely because each individual decision is defensible. 5 minutes of proofreading slides is reasonable. Displaying a tiny window sign supporting safe driving is harmless. Going to a free seminar about retirement planning is prudent. Skipping one dinner to spend time with your partner is romantic. The trap isn't in any single yes. The trap is in how those yeses compound, each one making the next harder to refuse, until you're locked into commitments that you would never have agreed to if asked directly at the beginning. Corporate culture weaponizes this constantly. You're hired for a clearly defined role with specific responsibilities. Then there's a small project outside your job description that would really help the team. You take it on because you're new, eager to prove yourself, and it's just one project. Then another. Then you're regularly doing work that should belong to a different department. But saying no now would mean abandoning your identity as the person who helps out. The team player, the reliable one. Years pass. You're overworked, underpaid for the scope of what you're actually doing, and resenting every minute. But you can't point to a single moment of exploitation because each task was accepted voluntarily. Your employer never forced you. They just relied on your need for consistency with your own previous decisions. Political campaigns and charitable organizations are masters of this technique. First, they ask you to sign a petition, just your name, supporting a cause you care about. Then they ask if you'd share the petition on social media. Easy enough, aligned with your values. Then they ask for a small donation, $5 or $10, less than you spend on coffee. You've already established yourself as someone who supports this cause, so refusing feels inconsistent. Then they ask for volunteer hours, larger donations, attending rallies. Each escalation is framed as a natural extension of your previous commitment. And because humans are storytelling creatures who need our behaviors to make coherent sense, we construct narratives where these escalating commitments feel not just logical, but essential to who we are. Research across domains, sales, psychology, sociology, behavioral economics, consistently shows the same result. Initial compliance with a small request can increase subsequent compliance with related larger requests by anywhere from 3 to 10 times baseline rates. This isn't a minor effect. This is one of the most reliable ways to change behavior ever documented. And the most unsettling part? The technique often works even when people are aware of it. Studies have shown that warning participants about the foot-in-the-door phenomenon only marginally reduces its effectiveness. Knowing you're being manipulated doesn't fully protect you because the psychological drive for consistency operates at a level deeper than conscious knowledge. So how do you defend yourself against a tactic this powerful and pervasive? The answer starts with a fundamental shift in how you evaluate requests. Most people evaluate each new ask by looking at the ask itself. Is this reasonable? Can I spare the time? Is this person deserving of help? But that's not how you should analyze requests when you suspect foot-in-the-door escalation. Instead, you need to implement what I call the reset point technique. Every time someone asks you for something, especially if you've already helped them before, you must pause and ask yourself this critical question. If this were the very first thing they were asking me, if we had no previous history, would I say yes to this request? This removes the consistency bias. It forces you to evaluate the current ask on its own merits, rather than through the distorting lens of previous commitments. When Linda's colleague asked her to spend 45 minutes restructuring his presentation, the reset point question would have revealed the absurdity. Would she agree to spend nearly an hour on someone else's project when she had her own deadline if this were the first time he'd asked? Absolutely not. The reset point only works if you genuinely commit to it as a practice, something you do reflexively before agreeing to any request that builds on previous ones. It's uncomfortable at first because it requires acknowledging that your previous yeses don't obligate you to future ones. That being a consistent person doesn't mean being an endlessly compliant person. You also need to become skilled at recognizing escalation patterns. Small requests that occur in isolation are usually harmless. But when you notice a pattern, the asks are getting bigger, more frequent, more demanding. That's your signal that someone, consciously or not, is using foot-in-the-door escalation. Red flags include phrases like, "You've been so helpful before, I knew I could count on you." This is just one more small thing. You're already familiar with this, so it'll be quick for you. And the most insidious one, "You already started this, might as well finish." These statements are designed to trigger your consistency bias, to make refusing feel like betrayal of your previous helpful self. When you catch these patterns, you have to exercise what might feel like the hardest skill in interpersonal dynamics: changing your mind. You need to be able to say, without guilt or apology, "I agreed to help with X, but this is different. I'm not available for Y." This is where most people fail. They've been socially conditioned to believe that changing your mind means you're flaky, unreliable, or dishonest. But there's a crucial distinction between commitment and entrapment. Honoring a specific commitment you made is integrity. Allowing that commitment to be weaponized into an ever-expanding obligation is being exploited. Practice this language. I was happy to help with the initial request, but what you're asking now is beyond what I agreed to. I need to decline. Notice there's no apology, no elaborate justification, no invitation to negotiate. You're simply drawing a boundary between the original commitment and the current request. If someone reacts poorly to this boundary, if they get angry, hurt, or accusatory, that's incredibly valuable information. It tells you they weren't asking for help. They were testing how far they could escalate your compliance. People who genuinely respect you will accept your boundary without punishment or manipulation. You should also implement personal rules that create automatic circuit breakers in escalation patterns. One powerful rule: never agree to any significant new commitment on the spot. Tell people you need 24 to 48 hours to consider anything that requires more than minimal effort. This pause disrupts the psychological momentum that makes each subsequent yes feel inevitable. During that pause, run through the reset point analysis. Talk to someone outside the situation who can offer objective perspective. Write down what you're actually being asked to commit to. Sometimes seeing it in writing reveals absurdities that feel reasonable when spoken aloud. Another critical practice is maintaining what I call a commitment log. Keep a simple record of favors, requests, and help you provide to others. This isn't about being transactional or keeping score in relationships. It's about having objective data on patterns you might not consciously notice. When you review your log monthly, you'll see clearly if someone is consuming a disproportionate amount of your time and energy. You'll notice escalation that felt gradual in the moment, but looks stark in retrospect. This external record overrides your biased memory, which tends to minimize how much you've already given and exaggerate how important each new ask seems. For situations where you've already fallen deep into a foot-in-the-door pattern, extraction requires what feels like violating your core sense of self. You have to be willing to look inconsistent, to admit that your previous yeses were mistakes, to disappoint someone who's grown accustomed to your compliance. This is brutally difficult. Your brain will scream that you're being a bad person, that you're letting people down, that you're not who you thought you were. Push through that discomfort. The alternative is continuing to sacrifice your own goals, time, and well-being to maintain an illusion of consistency. When Linda finally confronted the reality of her situation, she had to tell Marcus directly, "I've been helping you with projects that are your responsibility, and it's affecting my own work. I won't be available for that anymore." Marcus was shocked, hurt, confused. He'd genuinely come to see her assistance as normal, expected, deserved. Her withdrawal felt like betrayal to him. But within 3 months of reclaiming her time, Linda's performance improved dramatically. Within a year, she got the promotion that had eluded her, and Marcus, forced to handle his own responsibilities, either stepped up or faced consequences. But either way, it wasn't Linda's problem anymore. Recovery from foot-in-the-door exploitation often means accepting that people will be disappointed in you. Some relationships will end. Some people will call you selfish or unreliable. Let them. Those relationships were built on your compliance, not your mutual value. They were transactions disguised as connections. The people worth keeping in your life will respect your boundaries. They'll understand when you say no. They'll never use your previous generosity as leverage for future demands. And when you do choose to help them, it'll be because you genuinely want to, not because you're trapped in an escalating pattern of obligatory compliance. One final critical point. The foot-in-the-door phenomenon isn't just something others do to you. You do it to yourself. Every time you commit to something small, going to the gym once, working on a project for an hour, making a single healthy meal, you're leveraging commitment and consistency to build momentum toward larger goals. The same psychological principle that makes you vulnerable to exploitation can be a powerful tool for positive change if you use it consciously and deliberately. Want to build a new habit? Start absurdly small. Want to change careers? Take one tiny step. Want to improve a relationship? Make one small gesture. The difference between being manipulated and self-directed use of commitment lies in awareness and autonomy. When you consciously choose the initial small commitment and design the escalation yourself, you're using the technique as a tool. When someone else designs the escalation path and you follow it unconsciously, you're being controlled. Now you understand the mechanism. Small initial request. Agreement. Slightly larger request. Agreement, escalation, escalation. Commitment and consistency bias, making each subsequent yes feel inevitable. Each no feel like betrayal of your own identity. You know how to defend yourself. Reset point analysis. Recognizing escalation patterns, honoring boundaries over consistency. Implementing cooling off periods for major decisions. Maintaining objective records of your commitments. The foot in the door phenomenon will be used on you again this week, probably today. By a colleague, a company, a charity, a family member. Maybe someone with the best intentions who doesn't even realize what they're doing. The question is whether you'll recognize it happening, or whether you'll wake up 3 months from now, wondering how you ended up committed to something you never wanted in the first place. Remember, you are not obligated to be consistent with a past version of yourself who had less information, different priorities, or was manipulated into a small yes that became a massive obligation. You're allowed to change your mind. You're allowed to draw boundaries. You're allowed to say that helping once doesn't mean helping forever. The foot is at your door right now. The question is whether you're going to let it turn into an arm, then a body, then a permanent occupant who takes over your house while you convince yourself you're just being a good host. Choose differently. Choose awareness. Every request starts fresh. Every yes is given freely or not at all. But knowing this technique is only the beginning. Because while the foot in the door phenomenon manipulates your sense of personal consistency, there's another technique that manipulates something even more powerful. Your need to belong, your instinct to follow the herd, your deep biological drive to do what everyone else is doing. And that technique is invisible precisely because you never notice you're following. You think the crowd you're joining actually exists. Chapter 2. Social Proof Manipulation. How they make you follow the invisible crowd. Carol Matthews stared at her laptop screen at 2 a.m, credit card in hand, about to spend $4,000 on an online business course she'd never heard of until 3 hours ago. The sales page was still open in her browser. Testimonials from people claiming they'd made 6 figures in 6 months. A countdown timer showing only 47 minutes left to enroll. And that number at the top of the page that had hooked her completely. Join 127 for 83 successful students, already transforming their lives. 127,000 people. Surely that many people couldn't all be wrong. Surely if that many had already taken the leap, it must be legitimate, valuable, worth the investment. Carol wasn't impulsive with money. She was 46, worked in accounting, prided herself on careful financial decisions. But something about that massive number made her doubt her initial skepticism and trust the crowd she'd never met. She clicked purchase. The course turned out to be generic recycled content available free elsewhere. The testimonials were fabricated, and the student count was completely invented. There were actually fewer than 3,000 students, and most of them had bought the course on sale for $300, not $4,000. But Carol never knew that until 6 months later when she tried to get a refund and discovered the company had disappeared. What made an intelligent, financially conservative woman abandon her judgment and follow a crowd that didn't exist? Social proof, one of the most powerful influence mechanisms hardwired into human psychology, and one of the easiest to fake in the digital age. We are herd animals. That's not metaphor, it's evolutionary biology. For hundreds of thousands of years, following the group meant survival, and deviating from the group meant death. If everyone in your tribe suddenly started running, you didn't stop to analyze whether the threat was real. You ran too, because the ones who hesitated became food for predators. If everyone avoided certain plants or water sources, you avoided them too. because the ones who experimented died from poison. This instinct served our ancestors brilliantly. But in modern society, it's become a vulnerability that marketers, politicians, scammers, and manipulators exploit with surgical precision. They've learned that you don't need to convince people something is true, valuable, or safe. You just need to convince them that everyone else already believes it. The principle is straightforward. People look to the actions and choices of others to determine their own, especially in situations where they feel uncertain or lack information. The more people appear to be doing something, the more correct that action seems, regardless of any objective analysis of whether it actually makes sense. Psychologist Solomon Asch demonstrated this with disturbing clarity in his famous conformity experiments during the 1950s. He showed participants a line on a card and asked them to identify which of 3 other lines matched its length. The answer was obvious. Anyone with functional vision could see which line was the same length. But Asch placed each real participant in a room with several actors who'd been instructed to confidently give the wrong answer. The results were sobering. When the actors unanimously chose an obviously incorrect line, 75% of real participants conformed at least once, agreeing with the group's clearly wrong answer despite the evidence of their own eyes. Many participants later reported feeling confused and anxious when their perception conflicted with the group's consensus, doubting their own judgment more than the group's. Let that sink in. 3/4 of people will deny the evidence right in front of them if enough other people confidently state the opposite. And these were strangers in a laboratory setting with no real consequences for disagreement. Imagine how much stronger the pressure becomes when the group is your peers, when money is involved, when you're afraid of missing out on something everyone else seems to understand. This is the foundation that modern social proof manipulation builds on. Marketers don't need to prove their product works. They just need to create the illusion that massive numbers of people are already buying it. Political campaigns don't need to demonstrate their candidate is qualified. They just need to fabricate the appearance of overwhelming popular support. Scammers don't need to offer actual value. They just need to manufacture testimonials and metrics suggesting everyone else has already jumped on board. And in the digital age, manufacturing social proof has become absurdly easy. You can buy 10,000 Instagram followers for $50. You can purchase 5-star reviews on Amazon by the 100. You can hire companies to create fake video testimonials featuring actors who'll enthusiastically praise your product for $20 per clip. You can program countdown timers that reset for every visitor, creating artificial urgency. You can display fabricated numbers, students enrolled, units sold, people watching, that have no connection to reality. Daniel Foster learned this lesson the hard way when he invested $80,000 into what he believed was a revolutionary cryptocurrency fund. The website showed impressive metrics: 37,000 investors, $214 million under management, daily profit updates showing consistent returns. The Telegram group had 12,000 members enthusiastically sharing their gains. Every signal screamed legitimacy through sheer volume. What Daniel didn't know was that those investor numbers were fiction. The Telegram members were mostly bots and paid shills, and the daily profit updates were just numbers on a screen backed by nothing. When he tried to withdraw his money 6 months later, the entire operation vanished overnight. 37,000 investors had felt real enough to override his skepticism. The crowd had seemed too large to question. Social proof manipulation works because it bypasses your critical thinking and triggers instinct. When you see that hundreds of thousands of people have made a choice, your brain doesn't carefully evaluate whether that choice makes sense for you. It assumes the crowd has already done that evaluation and reached consensus. You outsource your judgment to the apparent wisdom of the masses. This is why restaurant owners hire people to stand in line outside their establishments during opening week. There's no actual wait for tables, but passers-by see the line and assume the restaurant must be exceptional if that many people are willing to wait. The artificial line creates real demand. This is why software companies display messages like, 843 people are viewing this product right now, or someone in New York just purchased this item. Whether those statements are true becomes irrelevant. The appearance of activity creates the perception of desirability. This is why fake online reviews are a billion-dollar industry. A product with 500 five-star reviews sells exponentially better than an identical product with only 5 reviews. Even if those 500 reviews were purchased from click farms in developing countries where people write generic praise for products they've never seen. The manipulation becomes even more sophisticated when combined with specificity. Generic social proof, like "many people love this," is less effective than specific social proof, like 12,847 doctors recommend this, or used by 93% of Fortune 500 companies. The precision creates credibility. Your brain assumes those exact numbers must be based on real data, even though they're often completely fabricated. Emily Rodriguez fell victim to this when she signed up for a premium meditation app that claimed over 2.4 million users achieved daily calm. That specific number felt authoritative, verified, trustworthy. A year later, investigative journalists revealed the company had fewer than 200,000 active users and had simply invented the 2.4 million figure. But by then, Emily had paid for an annual subscription she barely used, influenced by a crowd that existed primarily in marketing materials. The most insidious form of social proof manipulation targets your specific identity and peer group. It's one thing to know that millions of random people use a product. It's far more powerful to believe that people like you, people in your demographic, people who share your values or profession or lifestyle, have already made that choice. This is why pharmaceutical ads don't just say their drug is popular. They show people who look like you, living lives like yours, achieving the outcomes you want. This is why political campaigns micro-target social proof messages, so you see endorsements from people in your state, your profession, your age group, creating the illusion that your tribe has already reached consensus. Thomas Chen, a freelance graphic designer, spent $6,000 on specialized design software after seeing that 89% of award-winning creatives used it. That statistic was pure invention. The company had surveyed 23 designers at a conference they sponsored and extrapolated wildly. But Thomas never thought to verify it. He saw himself as an award-winning creative, or someone who wanted to be. And if that was his peer group's choice, it must be the right tool. Social proof manipulation becomes exponentially more effective when combined with scarcity. Another technique we'll explore later. When you believe that everyone is doing something and that the opportunity to join them is disappearing, your brain switches from analytical thinking to panic-driven impulse. You stop asking whether you should participate and start fearing you'll be left out if you don't act immediately. This is the mechanism behind investment bubbles. From tulip mania in the 1600s to cryptocurrency speculation today, people don't invest because they've analyzed the fundamentals. They invest because they see others profiting and fear missing the wave. The social proof of apparent success overrides rational evaluation of actual value. So how do you defend yourself against a mechanism this powerful when it's being systematically faked across every platform and industry? The answer requires implementing what I call the crowd check, a systematic process for evaluating whether the social proof you're seeing is real and whether it's actually relevant to your decision. Step 1. Assume all social proof is fake until proven otherwise. This isn't cynicism. It's realism in an environment where manufacturing consensus has become trivially easy and enormously profitable. That number showing thousands of sales or enrollments or users should be treated as invented until verified. Step 2. Investigate the source. Where are these numbers coming from? Is there any independent verification? Can you find confirmation outside their own marketing materials? If a course claims 100,000 students, search for evidence of that enrollment beyond what the company itself says. If a product claims to be used by Fortune 500 companies, look for those companies named and verifiable. Most manufactured social proof collapses under the slightest scrutiny. But most people never scrutinize it. They see the number, feel the influence, and act without verification. Simply pausing to ask, "How do I know this is true?" eliminates the majority of fake social proof. Step 3. Ask whether the crowd is actually people like you with goals like yours. A million people using something doesn't mean it's right for you. A million people might be using a free version while you're being sold the premium tier. A million people might have different needs, resources, or priorities. Social proof is only relevant when the crowd making the choice shares your context. If you're evaluating business software and the marketing claims millions of users, dig deeper. What percentage are enterprise customers versus individual users? What industries are they in? What problems were they trying to solve? If the crowd doesn't match your situation, their choices tell you nothing useful about your decision. Step 4. Separate popularity from quality. The most popular choice is not automatically the best choice. Windows was more popular than Mac for decades. That didn't make it better for everyone. McDonald's serves billions. That doesn't make it the highest quality food. Social proof tells you about mass adoption, not about whether something is actually good or right for your specific needs. Step 5. Make decisions based on your own research and values first. Then check if others' experiences align, rather than letting the crowd's apparent choice become your primary decision factor. This is the crucial reversal. Use social proof as confirmation of decisions you've already made through independent analysis, not as the foundation of decisions you haven't yet evaluated. Carol, the woman who bought the $4,000 course, implemented these principles after her expensive lesson. When she later considered a legitimate professional certification program, she saw testimonials claiming thousands of successful graduates. But this time, she investigated. She searched LinkedIn for people claiming that certification and messaged 20 of them asking about their experience. 15 responded. About half felt the certification had genuinely helped their careers. Half felt it had been a waste of money and time. That real social proof, actual people she could verify and communicate with, gave her far better information than any marketing testimonial. She enrolled, but with realistic expectations based on genuine feedback rather than manufactured consensus. The nuclear option for defending against social proof manipulation is deliberately choosing contrarian positions in low-stakes situations to build your resistance to crowd influence. Practice going to restaurants with few online reviews instead of highly rated ones. Try products that aren't trending. Form opinions on topics before checking what the consensus view seems to be. This isn't about being different for the sake of it. It's about training your brain to make independent judgments rather than defaulting to crowd behavior. The more you practice evaluating things without first knowing what everyone else thinks, the stronger your analytical muscles become and the less susceptible you are to manufactured consensus. Remember that social proof is a tool, not a truth. It tells you what people are doing or what someone wants you to believe people are doing. It doesn't tell you what you should do. Your decisions need to be based on your goals, your values, your resources, your context. not on whether you can join an imaginary crowd of millions who may not even exist. Now you understand how your instinct to follow the herd can be weaponized against you. You know how easy it is to manufacture the appearance of consensus. You know how to verify whether social proof is real and relevant before letting it influence your choices. But there's another technique that's even more insidious. One that doesn't just make you follow the crowd, but makes you feel personally obligated to give far more than you ever intended. It starts with a gift you never asked for and ends with you trapped in a debt you can't escape. Chapter 3. The Reciprocity Trap, the Debt You Never Asked For. Robert Harrison was having lunch at his desk when his business partner walked in holding 2 expensive coffees from the specialty shop 3 blocks away. "Got you your usual," Marcus said, setting the $12 latte on Robert's desk with a smile. "Figured you could use the caffeine boost." Robert thanked him, genuinely touched by the gesture. They'd been building their consulting firm together for 3 years, and these small acts of thoughtfulness were part of what made their partnership work. The coffee was perfect, exactly how he liked it, and Marcus hadn't asked for anything in return. 2 days later, Marcus stopped by Robert's office again. "Hey, I know this is last minute, but would you mind covering that client presentation tomorrow? Something came up with my kid's school and I really need to be there." Robert had his own meeting scheduled, but Marcus had just brought him coffee unprompted, had been so considerate. How could he say no to a simple favor when Marcus had been so generous? He rearranged his schedule and covered the presentation. The following week, Marcus asked if Robert could take lead on a proposal that was technically Marcus's responsibility. Again, Robert felt the pull of obligation. Marcus had done him that kindness with the coffee, had trusted him with the client presentation. Refusing would feel ungrateful, would make Robert seem like someone who didn't reciprocate generosity. Over the next 6 months, this pattern became their new normal. Marcus would occasionally bring coffee, buy lunch, do small favors Robert hadn't requested. And then, with increasing frequency, Marcus would ask Robert to handle his work, client meetings, proposals, difficult conversations. Each time, Robert felt compelled to say yes because Marcus had done those small kindnesses, because refusing would mean he was taking advantage of Marcus's generosity. By the time Robert realized what was happening, he was essentially doing both his job and half of Marcus's, while Marcus collected the same partnership distribution despite contributing progressively less. When Robert finally confronted him, Marcus seemed genuinely confused. "But I've always been there for you. I thought we helped each other out." He wasn't lying. From his perspective, the occasional coffee or lunch created a relationship of mutual support. From Robert's perspective, those unrequested gestures had created a debt that Marcus exploited systematically, turning a $12 coffee into hundreds of hours of unpaid labor through the psychological principle of reciprocity. This is the reciprocity trap, one of the most powerful and misunderstood influence techniques in human interaction. The principle is deceptively simple. When someone gives you something, you feel obligated to give something back, often something far more valuable than what you received. This obligation is so deeply wired into human psychology that it works even when the initial gift was unsolicited, unwanted, or transparently manipulative. The rule of reciprocity evolved for good evolutionary reasons. In ancestral environments, reciprocal altruism was essential for survival. If someone shared food with you during times of plenty, you needed to feel obligated to share with them during their times of scarcity, or the social fabric that kept the group alive would collapse. People who violated reciprocity norms got ostracized, which in prehistoric contexts meant death. Your brain therefore treats gifts and favors as creating genuine debts. triggering the same neural mechanisms that respond to actual financial obligations. When someone does something for you, your brain registers an imbalance that creates psychological discomfort until you've reciprocated and restored equilibrium. This discomfort is so unpleasant that most people will go to considerable lengths to discharge the perceived debt as quickly as possible. Manipulators understand this instinct and weaponize it by giving you things you never asked for, creating obligations you never agreed to, and then calling in debts far exceeding the value of their initial investment. The most insidious part is that this feels like genuine social exchange, like normal relationship dynamics, until you step back and realize the math doesn't add up. The classic demonstration of reciprocity's power comes from researcher Dennis Regan's 1971 study. Participants thought they were evaluating art with another person who was actually a confederate working with the researcher. In one condition, during a break, the confederate left the room and returned with 2 bottles of Coca-Cola, giving one to the participant as an unsolicited gift. In the control condition, the confederate didn't bring any drinks. Later, the confederate asked participants if they'd buy raffle tickets he was selling, explaining he'd get a prize if he sold enough. Participants who'd received the free Coca-Cola bought twice as many raffle tickets as those who hadn't, spending significantly more money on tickets than the Coke had cost. The unsolicited 10-cent drink created a sense of obligation that translated into dollars of spending on something participants didn't want. Even more striking, participants who reported disliking the Confederate still bought more tickets if he'd given them the Coca-Cola. The reciprocity obligation overpowered their personal feelings about the person. The gift created a debt that had to be repaid regardless of whether they even liked the gift giver. This is why companies send you free samples, why charities mail you address labels before asking for donations, why car salespeople offer you coffee and comfortable seating before negotiating price. The gift, however small, creates a psychological imbalance that makes you more compliant with subsequent requests. Susan Rodriguez discovered this when a financial advisor offered her a free retirement planning consultation worth, he emphasized, $300 normally. Susan hadn't been looking for financial advice, but free expertise seemed valuable, so she accepted. The advisor spent 90 minutes reviewing her finances, providing genuinely useful recommendations, and building a comprehensive plan she could implement herself if she wanted. At the end, he mentioned that his firm offered managed investment services that could handle everything he'd outlined. Susan felt trapped. He'd just given her 90 minutes of professional time and valuable advice completely free. How could she take all that expertise and walk away without giving him anything in return? It felt dishonest, ungrateful, like stealing his knowledge. She signed up for the managed service, agreeing to annual fees that would total tens of thousands of dollars over time, all because she felt obligated to reciprocate a free consultation she'd never asked for. The advisor had invested 90 minutes to create a debt that would pay him for decades. The reciprocity trap becomes even more effective when the manipulator appears to be giving generously without expecting anything in return. When someone explicitly frames their gift or favor as transactional, "I'll do this if you do that," your psychological defenses activate. But when someone gives seemingly selflessly, you lower your guard, accept the gift as genuine kindness, and feel the obligation even more strongly because they're being so generous. This is why the most effective manipulation feels like friendship. The manipulator does favors, buys meals, offers help with things you didn't ask for assistance with. They establish themselves as generous, thoughtful, supportive. And then, when they need something, they don't explicitly reference the favors they've done. They just ask, and you feel the weight of accumulated obligation compelling you to say yes. James Wilson experienced this in his personal life when his brother started visiting more frequently. always bringing small gifts, a bottle of wine, a book James had mentioned wanting, tickets to a game. James appreciated the gestures, felt closer to his brother than they'd been in years. Then his brother asked if he could borrow $15,000 for a business investment that couldn't wait. James didn't have that money easily available, and the investment sounded questionable. But his brother had been so thoughtful, so generous with his time and gifts over the past months. Saying no felt like rejecting not just the loan request, but the entire relationship his brother had been building. James took out a home equity loan and gave his brother the money. The business investment failed, his brother couldn't repay the loan, and James spent 5 years paying back money he'd borrowed to discharge an obligation created by a few $100s of unrequested gifts. The reciprocity trap works because the obligation isn't proportional to the gift. It's proportional to how the gift makes you feel. A small gesture at exactly the right moment. Something that shows someone was thinking of you or paying attention to your needs can create a sense of indebtedness far exceeding its monetary value. This is why manipulative colleagues remember your coffee order, why skilled salespeople notice details about your life and follow up on them, why effective scammers build relationships through seemingly selfless attention before making their ask. They're not being kind. They're making investments that will pay psychological dividends when they need something from you. Organizations weaponize this systematically. Free trials aren't about letting you evaluate a product. They're about creating the reciprocity obligation. Once you've used something free for 2 weeks, canceling feels like you're taking advantage, like you're the bad guy for not paying for something the company generously gave you. Complimentary consultations, assessments, evaluations, and analyses serve the same function. The company gives you something valuable for free, creating a psychological debt that makes you feel obligated to purchase their services, even if you don't need them or could find better alternatives elsewhere. Political campaigns exploit this when candidates do constituent favors, helping navigate bureaucracy, attending community events, solving local problems. Citizens who benefit feel obligated to support the candidate even if they disagree with their policies, because the candidate did something personal and helpful that created a sense of debt. The reciprocity trap becomes especially pernicious in relationships where ongoing exchange is expected. In healthy relationships, reciprocity is balanced and mutual. Both parties give and receive naturally, without keeping score. But manipulative relationships pervert this dynamic. The manipulator gives conspicuously, often things you didn't ask for and don't particularly want, creating visible acts of generosity that establish debt. Then they extract payment through requests for things far more valuable than what they gave. The asymmetry is hidden because generosity is praised and obligation is invisible. When someone is constantly doing favors for you, declining to reciprocate makes you look ungrateful in your own eyes and potentially in others' eyes. The social norm is that generous people deserve appreciation and support. Refusing to help someone who's helped you violates that norm, making you the villain regardless of whether their initial help was something you wanted or needed. So how do you escape the reciprocity trap without becoming a cynical person who refuses all kindness and generosity? The first and most critical principle: distinguish between gifts and investments. A gift is given because the giver wants you to have it, with no expectation of return. An investment is given to create obligation, to establish debt, to manufacture future compliance. The difference isn't always obvious at the moment of giving, but you can learn to recognize the patterns. Gifts are proportional to the relationship. Someone you've known for 3 years bringing you coffee occasionally is giving a gift. Someone you met 2 weeks ago insisting on buying you an expensive lunch is making an investment. Gifts align with established relationship norms. Investments escalate beyond those norms to create disproportionate obligation. Gifts don't come with strings, spoken or unspoken. The giver doesn't remind you of them, doesn't reference them when asking for favors, doesn't create a running tally of their generosity. Investments get cashed in. The person who gave them will remind you of their generosity, explicitly or implicitly, when they want something from you. When someone gives you something unsolicited, implement the unsolicited gift rule. You are not obligated to reciprocate what you didn't request. This goes against your psychological programming, which screams that refusing to reciprocate makes you a terrible person. But accepting obligation for unrequested favors gives everyone around you the power to create unlimited debt simply by doing things for you that you never asked them to do. Practice saying, "I appreciate the thought, but I didn't ask for this, so I don't feel obligated." This language is critical because it acknowledges the gesture without accepting the debt. You're not being rude or ungrateful. You're refusing to participate in a dynamic where others control your obligations through unrequested generosity. In Robert's situation, the correct response when Marcus brought the unrequested coffee would have been, "Thanks, but you didn't need to do that. I'm happy to get my own coffee." Not hostile, not ungrateful, but establishing clearly that Robert wasn't accepting a debt. Had he done this consistently, Marcus couldn't have built the accumulated obligation that eventually trapped him. When you do accept favors or gifts, particularly from people you don't know well, explicitly acknowledge them without letting them create ongoing debt. "Thank you for the coffee. That was thoughtful," closes the loop. "I really appreciate you doing that. Let me know if I can return the favor sometime," opens a debt account. The first treats the gesture as complete. The second acknowledges ongoing obligation. The second major defense is recognizing when reciprocity has become asymmetric. If you notice that someone is constantly doing unsolicited favors for you, or that you're frequently saying yes to their requests because of previous help they've given, stop and do the math. Are you actually receiving value proportional to what you're giving? Or has an imbalanced debt relationship developed? Keep a simple mental or actual record of the exchange. Not to be transactional in genuine relationships, but to notice when someone is systematically creating obligation. If you find that someone's small gestures are consistently translating into you doing large favors, you're in a reciprocity trap, and you need to stop accepting the gestures and stop honoring the implied debt. When someone tries to call in a debt, "After everything I've done for you," you have the right to evaluate whether what they did for you actually creates the obligation they're claiming. Often, manipulators inflate the value of their gifts in retrospect. The coffee they brought becomes, "I'm always there for you." The one time they covered a meeting becomes, "I've supported you so much." Don't accept their valuation of their generosity. Evaluate objectively whether their past actions genuinely create the obligation they're invoking. If the math doesn't add up, you can say directly, "I appreciated the coffee you bought me, but that doesn't obligate me to work weekends on your projects." Those aren't proportional exchanges. This will feel brutal. It violates social norms about gratitude and reciprocity. But it's the truth, and saying it breaks the manipulation. For ongoing relationships where you want to prevent reciprocity traps from forming, establish explicit expectations about exchange. "I appreciate offers to help, but I prefer to ask when I need something rather than having people do things for me unsolicited," sets a clear boundary. So does, "Let's keep our professional relationship focused on the work rather than personal favors." This seems cold, but it's actually protecting the relationship from manipulation. In Robert's case, if he'd established early that he preferred keeping business and personal gestures separate, or that he liked getting his own coffee and handling his own responsibilities, the manipulative dynamic couldn't have developed without becoming obviously inappropriate. The nuclear option, when you're deep in a reciprocity trap, is accepting that the other person will be disappointed, hurt, or angry when you stop paying the debt they believe you owe. Susan, who signed up for the investment management service, eventually realized she was paying thousands in fees annually for mediocre returns. When she moved her money to a low-cost index fund, the advisor was genuinely upset, reminding her of all the free advice he'd given, how much time he'd invested in her plan. She had to accept that from his perspective, she was violating an agreement. He'd given her free consultation, expecting it would convert to a client relationship. But she never agreed to that exchange. He assumed it, created the expectation unilaterally, and then presented the bill. Walking away felt like betraying the relationship. But staying would have meant paying for years for something she didn't need, just to discharge a debt she never agreed to incur. Remember that genuine generosity doesn't demand repayment. People who give because they care about you will be happy if you thrive, whether or not you reciprocate in kind. People who give to create obligation will be upset when you don't pay the debt they believe they're owed. Their disappointment is actually proof that their giving was never about you. It was about controlling you. The reciprocity principle isn't inherently manipulative. It's the foundation of healthy social relationships, commerce, and community. The trap occurs when someone exploits this principle by giving unrequested gifts to create disproportionate obligations, then extracting value far exceeding what they invested. Defend yourself by recognizing unsolicited generosity as potential debt creation, refusing to accept obligations you didn't agree to, evaluating whether reciprocity is truly proportional, and being willing to disappoint people who demand payment for gifts you never asked for. You're not obligated to impoverish yourself, sacrifice your time, or compromise your values just because someone did something nice for you that you didn't request. That's not how genuine relationships work. That's how manipulation works. But while the reciprocity trap controls you through social obligation, the next technique we'll explore controls you through something even more insidious: the manipulation of your perception of value itself, where the first number you hear becomes the invisible anchor determining every choice that follows. Chapter 4: Anchoring Bias. How the first number sets the price of your life. Michael Torres sat across from the real estate agent, looking at the listing for a house he'd fallen in love with during the showing. The property was perfect. Right neighborhood, good schools, move-in ready. The agent slid the paperwork across the table with a practiced smile. The sellers are asking $950,000. It's been on the market for 2 weeks, so there's definitely room for negotiation. $950,000. That number lodged itself in Michael's mind immediately, becoming the reference point for everything that followed. He'd done his research. Comparable homes in the area had sold for between $750,000 and $820,000 in the past 6 months. This house was overpriced by at least $100,000, maybe more. But when Michael made his offer, he didn't start at $750,000 like the comparables suggested he should. He offered $875,000, treating the asking price as the starting point and negotiating down from there rather than negotiating up from fair market value. The seller countered at $910,000. Michael settled at $895,000, feeling like he'd won a negotiation because he'd gotten the seller down $55,000 from their asking price. He'd actually overpaid by at least $75,000 compared to market value. The asking price of $950,000 had become his anchor, the invisible reference point that determined the entire negotiation. By starting high, the seller had controlled the outcome without Michael ever realizing his judgment had been hijacked by that first number. This is the anchoring effect, one of the most powerful and pervasive cognitive biases affecting human decision-making. The first piece of information you receive, especially if it's numerical, disproportionately influences all subsequent judgments, evaluations, and decisions, often in ways completely disconnected from logic or actual value. Psychologists Amos Tversky and Daniel Kahneman first demonstrated this phenomenon in a famous experiment where they asked participants to estimate the percentage of African nations in the United Nations. Before answering, participants watched the experimenters spin a wheel of fortune that was rigged to land on either 10 or 65. When the wheel showed 10, participants' average estimate was 25%. When it showed 65, their average estimate was 45%. Think about what this means. A completely random number that participants knew was random still shifted their estimates by 20 percentage points. They understood the wheel had nothing to do with UN membership, yet their brains couldn't help using that arbitrary number as a starting point for their guess. This isn't about stupidity or lack of critical thinking. Anchoring operates at a level below conscious reasoning. Your brain is wired to use available information as reference points when making judgments, especially in situations involving uncertainty or complexity. Once an anchor is set, your brain adjusts from that starting point rather than evaluating independently. In negotiations, sales, and any decision involving numbers, whoever sets the anchor first controls the outcome. This is why experienced negotiators always make the first offer. They're establishing the reference point from which all subsequent discussion will flow. It doesn't matter if their initial number is absurdly high or low. Research consistently shows that final agreements cluster closer to first offers than to objectively fair values. Jennifer Walsh learned this when negotiating her salary for a new position. She'd researched the role thoroughly and knew the market rate was between $90,000 and $110,000 for someone with her experience. When the hiring manager asked about her salary expectations, Jennifer hesitated, worried about pricing herself out of the opportunity, and said she was hoping for something in the $85,000 to $90,000 range. That anchor of $85,000 immediately defined the negotiation. The company offered $92,000, which felt generous compared to Jennifer's stated range. She accepted, grateful they'd exceeded her minimum. Only later did she discover that her predecessor had been making $115,000 for the same role, and new hires with her qualifications typically received offers between $105,000 and $120,000. By anchoring low, Jennifer had cost herself at least $13,000 annually, over $130,000 across a decade. Because she'd set a reference point that pulled the entire negotiation downward. Had she opened with, "I'm looking for something in the $110,000 to $120,000 range," the offer might have been $105,000 or $108,000 instead. The anchoring effect works even when the anchor is completely irrelevant to the decision at hand. Researchers have shown that asking people to write down the last 2 digits of their Social Security number before estimating the value of products influences their price estimates, with higher Social Security digits leading to higher valuations. The participants know their Social Security number has nothing to do with wine prices or laptop values, yet the number still serves as an unconscious anchor. This means you're vulnerable to anchoring not just from strategic manipulation, but from random environmental numbers. Prices you saw earlier, quantities mentioned in conversation, figures from unrelated contexts. Your brain grabs whatever number it encountered first and uses that as the starting point for evaluation. Retailers exploit this ruthlessly through artificial, original prices that create anchors for perceived value. You see a jacket marked down from $300 to $120 and feel like you're getting a great deal, even if that jacket was manufactured to sell at $120. And the $300 price never existed except as a fictional anchor to make the real price seem reasonable. Department stores perfected this strategy decades ago. They display suggested retail prices that are purely imaginary, creating high anchors that make their actual prices appear discounted. The customer feels smart for getting 40% off, never questioning whether the original price was legitimate. The anchor did its job. It made $120 seem like a bargain compared to $300, regardless of actual value. Online retailers have refined this further. Other customers paid $249, creates an anchor suggesting that's the normal price, making your price of $199 feel special. Was $99, now $49, anchors you to $99. Making $49 seem irresistible even if the product is worth maybe $25. The anchoring effect becomes especially dangerous in high-stakes situations where you lack perfect information. Real estate, car purchases, salary negotiations, business deals. These are all domains where establishing the right anchor can shift outcomes by tens or hundreds of thousands of dollars. David Chen experienced this when selling his small business. He'd built the company over 15 years and wanted to retire, so he hired a business broker to find buyers. The broker suggested listing the business at $1.8 million, explaining this was standard practice to create room for negotiation. The first serious buyer offered $1.4 million. David was insulted. That was 22% below asking price. He countered at $1.7 million. They settled at $1.55 million, and David felt frustrated that he'd had to come down so far from his asking price. Months later, David discovered that a comparable business in his industry had sold for $2.3 million the same year. His broker had anchored him low deliberately, making the $1.55 million sale seem like the best he could do when he likely could have gotten $2 million or more with proper anchoring. The broker's low anchor had saved the buyer hundreds of thousands of dollars and cost David the same. And David never questioned it because $1.55 million felt reasonable relative to the $1.8 million starting point, even though that starting point itself was strategically deflated. So how do you defend against a bias so deeply embedded in human cognition that it works even when you're aware of it? The answer requires conscious, systematic effort to resist your brain's automatic anchoring mechanisms. First, refuse to accept anyone else's anchor as your reference point. When someone names a price, salary, or value, consciously detach from that number. Don't evaluate their offer as high or low relative to what they said. Evaluate it relative to independent research into actual market values. When Michael was negotiating for that house, the moment the agent said $950,000, he should have actively dismissed that number and returned to his research. Comparable sales averaging $800,000. His counteroffer should have been based on those comparables, perhaps $775,000 to create room for negotiation up to $800,000, rather than treating the seller's inflated anchor as gospel. Second, do your research before anyone gives you a number. If you walk into a negotiation without knowing the fair market value, you're vulnerable to any anchor they set. But if you've thoroughly researched prices, salaries, or values before the conversation begins, you have your own anchor based on objective data rather than their strategic manipulation. Jennifer should have researched salary ranges before her interview, establishing in her mind that this role pays $100,000 to $120,000. Then, when asked about expectations, she could anchor high, based on market rates for this position and my experience. I'm looking for $115,000 to $125,000. That anchor would have shifted the entire negotiation upward. Third, when possible, make the first offer yourself. This is counterintuitive because many people fear that naming a number first gives the other party information they can use against you. But research consistently shows that first offers disproportionately influence final outcomes. If you anchor high in a sale or anchoring high in a salary negotiation, you pull the settlement range toward your number. The key is anchoring ambitiously without being absurd. If you're selling something worth around $50,000 and you start at $200,000, you've lost credibility. But if you start at $75,000 with solid justification, you've shifted the negotiation range from $40,000 to $60,000 up to $60,000 to $75,000. Fourth, use objective criteria to reset anchors. When someone gives you a number that feels wrong, respond with external benchmarks. The market data I've seen suggests this typically sells for X, or industry standards for this role are Y. You're not arguing with their anchor. You're replacing it with a different one based on verifiable information. When David's broker suggested listing at $1.8 million, David should have said, "I've seen that comparable businesses in our sector have sold for between $2.1 and $2.5 million. Why are we anchoring below market?" That question would have forced the broker to justify the low anchor or admit it was strategic positioning that might not serve David's interests. Fifth, implement a cooling-off period for major decisions. Anchoring effects are strongest in the moment when you've just received the number. Taking time to step away, research independently, and return to the decision with fresh perspective weakens the anchor's grip. Tell people you need 24 to 48 hours to consider any significant offer or proposal. Then spend that time looking at objective data rather than fixating on their number. Finally, practice recognizing anchors in low-stakes situations to build your immunity. When shopping, notice the original prices and consciously evaluate whether the actual price is reasonable regardless of the anchor. When reading statistics or figures, pause before accepting them as reference points and ask whether they're legitimate benchmarks or strategic anchors. The anchoring effect will never disappear. It's too fundamental to how your brain processes numerical information. But you can minimize its control by refusing to use others' numbers as your starting point. Establishing your own anchors through research, and systematically checking whether your judgments are based on actual value or arbitrary reference points that someone else selected to manipulate your perception. Numbers have extraordinary power over your decisions precisely because they feel objective and factual. A price is just a price. A salary is just a salary. Except it's never just a number. It's an anchor that pulls your entire evaluation process toward it, often serving the interests of whoever set that anchor rather than reflecting genuine value. You've now learned how they control your perception of worth through strategic anchoring. How the first number you hear becomes the invisible standard against which everything else is measured. But there's one final technique we need to explore. One that doesn't manipulate your consistency, your social instincts, your sense of obligation, or your numerical judgment. This one manipulates something more primal. Your fear of loss, your panic at missing opportunities, your terror of being left behind while everyone else gets ahead. Chapter 5. Scarcity and Urgency Engineering. The Manufactured Crisis. The email arrived in Patricia Morgan's inbox on a Wednesday morning with a subject line that made her heart skip. Final notice. Your reservation expires in 6 hours. She clicked it immediately, anxiety rising, trying to remember what reservation she'd made and forgotten about. It was from an online retailer where she'd browsed running shoes 2 days ago. She'd added a pair to her cart but hadn't purchased them. The price seemed a bit high, and she wanted to think about it. Now the email was telling her that her reserved shoes were about to be released back to inventory because demand is extremely high, and they were holding her size for just 6 more hours as a courtesy. Patricia hadn't reserved anything. She'd simply looked at shoes on a website. But the message triggered immediate panic. What if her size sold out? What if she lost this opportunity? The shoes suddenly felt essential. like something she needed to act on immediately, rather than something she'd been ambivalent about 48 hours ago. She bought them during her lunch break, paying full price for shoes she hadn't been sure she wanted, driven entirely by manufactured urgency that existed nowhere except in an automated marketing email. The shoes arrived a week later. Her size was still available on the website. It had never been scarce. The 6-hour deadline had never been real. The entire crisis had been engineered to bypass her rational decision-making and trigger panic buying. This is scarcity and urgency engineering. The manipulation technique that doesn't convince you something is valuable. It terrifies you that you'll lose the opportunity to get it. By manufacturing the appearance of limited availability or limited time, manipulators trigger one of the most powerful psychological drivers in human behavior: loss aversion. The documented reality that humans feel the pain of potential loss roughly twice as strongly as the pleasure of equivalent gain. The principle behind scarcity is evolutionarily sound. In environments of genuine scarcity, prioritizing rare resources makes perfect survival sense. If there's only one antelope carcass and 5 hungry families, getting there first means the difference between eating and starving. If medicinal plants are rare, stockpiling them when you find them is intelligent planning. But modern marketers have learned to fake scarcity, creating the psychological experience of urgent resource competition when no actual scarcity exists. The result is that you make rushed, panicked decisions about things that are abundant and will be available tomorrow at the same price, simply because someone manufactured the appearance of imminent loss. Psychologist Robert Cialdini demonstrated scarcity's power in experiments where participants evaluated identical products under different availability conditions. When told a product was in limited supply, participants rated it as more valuable, more desirable, and higher quality than identical products described as abundant. The scarcity itself created perceived value independent of any actual product attributes. This effect intensifies dramatically when scarcity is time-limited. Telling someone only 5 left creates desire, but telling someone only 5 left and the sale ends in 2 hours creates panic. The combination of quantity scarcity and time scarcity overwhelms critical thinking, shifting your brain from analytical mode into emergency response mode, where immediate action feels more important than careful evaluation. Marcus Thompson learned this during Black Friday shopping when he stood in line at 3 a.m. for a television advertised as a doorbuster special. 55% off. Extremely limited quantities. Doors open at 5 a.m. He'd waited in the cold for 2 hours, surrounded by other eager shoppers, all convinced they were about to get an incredible deal on something that would sell out in minutes. The doors opened. The crowd surged forward. Marcus grabbed one of the televisions from the pallet near the entrance, relief flooding through him that he'd gotten one of the limited units before they ran out. He paid $449 for a 55-inch television, supposedly worth $999, feeling triumphant about his 55% savings. 3 weeks later, Marcus saw the identical television at the same store for $429. No special sale, regular inventory. The original price of $999 had been fiction. The television had been selling for between $420 and $450 all year round. The doorbuster quantity limits had been manufactured to create urgency around a discount that saved him maybe $20 at most. The entire event had been engineered to make $449 seem like an unmissable bargain for a television whose actual market value was around $400. Online retailers have refined scarcity engineering into a science. Booking websites show only 2 rooms left at this price to trigger immediate purchases. E-commerce sites display 12 people viewing this item right now to create competitive pressure. Countdown timers tick down to arbitrary deadlines that reset after expiration. Limited time offer appears on products that have been on limited time offer continuously for 3 years. The messages work because they hack your loss aversion instinct. Your brain processes missing out on a deal as losing money you already possessed, even though you never had the money or the product. The pain of potential loss overrides the rational observation that you don't actually need the item, that you could research better options, that the scarcity is likely fabricated. Flight booking sites weaponize this mercilessly. Only 3 seats left at this price appears while you're searching, creating pressure to book immediately rather than comparing alternatives. The truth is often that there are dozens of seats at that price, or that the airline dynamically adjusts pricing based on your browsing behavior, or that better deals exist on different dates. But the scarcity message triggers fear of missing out that short-circuits comparison shopping. Jennifer Adams fell victim to this when booking a vacation package. The website showed a countdown timer. This price expires in 14 minutes, and inventory warnings. Only 2 packages remain. She booked immediately, paying $3,200 for a package she later discovered was available for $2,400 through other channels and had never actually been scarce. The 14-minute timer had been code that reset for every visitor. The only 2 packages was pure fiction. Investment schemes exploit scarcity engineering with devastating effectiveness. Initial coin offerings, limited partnership opportunities, exclusive investment funds, all presented as rare chances available only to select individuals for limited windows. The scarcity creates perceived value and urgency that overrides due diligence. People invest in ventures they haven't researched because they're terrified of missing the opportunity while they investigate. Daniel Foster, whom you'll remember lost $80,000 to a cryptocurrency fraud, was initially hooked partly through scarcity messaging. The investment fund claimed to accept only qualified investors, and spots were filling quickly. This artificial exclusivity made the opportunity seem more valuable and created urgency to commit before doing thorough research. The scarcity was fake. The scammers accepted anyone with money, but it served its purpose of rushing people past their critical thinking. The most sophisticated scarcity manipulation combines real and fake elements. Airlines genuinely have limited seats on specific flights, so when they tell you only 4 seats left, it might be true. But they also might be hiding that another 100 seats are available at similar prices on flights an hour earlier or later. The scarcity is real in a narrow context, but fabricated in the broader context of what you actually need. So how do you defend yourself against a technique that exploits legitimate scarcity concerns while manufacturing most of the urgency you encounter? The answer requires systematic skepticism about any message that creates time or quantity pressure. First, assume all scarcity is fake until proven otherwise. This isn't cynicism. It's realism in an environment where manufacturing urgency is standard marketing practice. That countdown timer is probably code that resets. That only 3 left is likely either false or deliberately limiting display of abundant inventory. That exclusive offer is probably being sent to millions of people. When you encounter scarcity messaging, immediately pause and ask, how do I know this scarcity is real? Can I verify it independently? Is there genuine reason why this wouldn't be available tomorrow or next week? Most manufactured scarcity collapses under the slightest scrutiny. Second, implement a mandatory cooling-off period for any decision made under time pressure. Create a personal rule. If someone is pressuring you to decide quickly, your automatic answer is, I need 24 hours to think about it. Real opportunities that are genuinely scarce will still be worth pursuing after 24 hours of reflection. Fake urgency designed to bypass your critical thinking will often disappear or reveal itself as manipulation when you step back. Patricia, who panic bought those running shoes, now follows this rule religiously. When she receives time-limited offers, she waits minimum 1 day before acting. If she still wants the item after 24 hours and it's no longer available, she accepts that loss. But 90% of the time, either the item is still available despite the deadline, or her desire for it fades once the artificial urgency is removed. Third, separate need from availability. Scarcity makes things feel more valuable, but scarcity and value are independent. Before acting on limited availability, ask yourself, would I want this at this price if it were abundantly available with no time pressure? If the answer is no, then the scarcity is controlling your decision rather than genuine value. Marcus should have asked himself, would I pay $450 for this television if it were sitting in the store next week with no special sale? The honest answer was no. He'd been planning to spend around $300. The doorbuster's scarcity made him stretch his budget for savings that didn't exist. Fourth, research the baseline. Before accepting that something is a good deal because it's scarce, find out what it normally costs and whether similar alternatives exist. When flight booking sites claim limited seats at a certain price, spend 15 minutes checking other dates, other airlines, other routes. When online retailers show countdown timers, search for the same product elsewhere. This research often reveals that the limited time price is actually higher than normal market rates, or that abundant alternatives exist, or that the product regularly goes on better sales than the current exclusive offer. The time you spend researching is the buffer that lets your rational mind catch up to the panic your emotional mind is experiencing. Fifth, recognize your personal vulnerability triggers. Some people are especially susceptible to quantity scarcity. Only 3 left hits them hard. Others respond more to time pressure. Sale ends tonight creates panic. Still others react to social scarcity. Exclusive access for select members triggers their desire for status. Knowing which scarcity messages affect you most lets you build specific defenses. If countdown timers reliably make you panic buy, train yourself to close the browser tab immediately when you see one and revisit after 24 hours. If limited quantity hooks you, make a rule that you only purchase after confirming availability through multiple sources. The nuclear option for defending against scarcity manipulation is embracing the possibility of missing out. Fear of missing out is only powerful if missing out feels catastrophic. When you internalize that missing a deal, an opportunity, or a product is almost never actually important, scarcity loses its grip. There will always be another sale, another investment opportunity, another chance to buy something you want. Missing this one doesn't mean missing your only chance. It usually just means waiting for a better opportunity that comes with less pressure and more time for evaluation. Training yourself to be comfortable with occasionally missing out dramatically reduces your vulnerability to manufactured urgency. Scarcity and urgency engineering work because they exploit legitimate survival instincts about resource competition. But in modern consumer environments, almost nothing is as scarce as marketers claim. The shoes will be available tomorrow. The investment opportunity will come around again. The sale price will return next month. Your decisions should be based on whether you genuinely want something at the price being offered, not on panic about losing an opportunity that probably isn't real and certainly isn't your last chance. When someone is rushing you, slow down. When someone says limited availability, verify it. When someone creates artificial deadlines, ignore them. You now understand all 5 techniques. how they escalate your commitments, manipulate your social instincts, create false obligations, anchor your value perceptions, and manufacture urgency where none exists. But knowing the techniques isn't enough. You need a systematic framework for recognizing and resisting these influence tactics in the moment when they're being used on you. That's what we'll build together in the conclusion. Your personal defense system against the invisible hand that's been shaping your choices without your consent. Conclusion. The AWARE framework. Your defense system. You now understand the 5 most powerful influence techniques used to control your decisions without your conscious awareness. You've seen how foot-in-the-door tactics escalate small agreements into massive commitments. How manufactured social proof makes you follow crowds that don't exist. How unrequested gifts create obligations you never agreed to. How arbitrary numbers anchor your perception of value. And how fake scarcity triggers panic that overrides rational thinking. But knowledge alone doesn't protect you. Understanding these mechanisms intellectually is different from recognizing them in real time when someone is using them against you. When your emotions are activated, when the pressure feels real. You need a systematic framework that translates awareness into action. A practical decision-making process you can implement the moment you suspect manipulation. That framework is AWARE, a 5-step system designed to interrupt influence tactics at the moment they're being deployed and give you back control of your choices. A. Analyze the request. The first step is recognizing that you're being asked for something and pausing before responding. This sounds obvious, but most influence techniques work precisely because they bypass this pause. They create momentum that carries you from question to agreement without conscious evaluation. When someone makes a request, asks you to buy something, presents an opportunity, or offers you a gift, stop. Don't respond immediately. Ask yourself 3 questions. What exactly am I being asked to do? Why am I being asked right now? Which of the 5 influence techniques might be at work here? Is this request following a smaller request you already agreed to? Suggesting foot-in-the-door escalation? Are they showing you evidence that many others have already said yes, deploying social proof? Did they recently give you something you didn't ask for, setting up reciprocity? Did they name a price or value first, establishing an anchor? Are they creating time pressure or claiming limited availability, manufacturing scarcity? Simply identifying which technique is being used dramatically reduces its power. Manipulation works best when invisible. Once you name it, you shift from unconscious reaction to conscious evaluation. Wait before deciding. Once you've analyzed the request and identified potential influence tactics, implement a mandatory waiting period before making any significant decision. The minimum is 24 hours for major commitments, but even 60 seconds of deliberate pause works for smaller requests. This waiting period serves multiple functions. It breaks the momentum that influence techniques rely on. It gives your emotional response time to subside so rational evaluation can engage. It allows you to research independently rather than accepting claims at face value. Most importantly, it signals to the other person that you make decisions thoughtfully rather than impulsively, which often causes them to back off from aggressive influence tactics. If someone reacts poorly to your request for time, if they increase pressure, claim the opportunity will disappear, or make you feel guilty for not deciding immediately, that reaction is itself valuable information. It tells you they're more interested in your compliance than your informed consent. A. Ask independent questions. During your waiting period, gather information from sources other than the person making the request. If you're evaluating a product, search for reviews from verified purchasers rather than testimonials on the sales page. If you're considering an investment, consult independent financial advisors rather than the person selling the opportunity. If you're negotiating salary, research market rates through industry databases rather than accepting the employer's anchor. This step directly counters social proof manipulation and anchoring. Independent sources give you genuine data rather than manufactured consensus or strategic reference points. They also help you identify whether scarcity claims are real. If something is truly scarce, multiple independent sources will confirm it. Ask specific questions designed to verify claims. How do you know this many people have purchased this? Can you provide verifiable references I can contact directly? What independent data supports this valuation? Why is this only available for a limited time? Legitimate offers withstand scrutiny. Manipulative ones typically collapse when questioned. R. Recognize the pattern, step back, and look at the broader pattern of interaction, not just the current request. Has this person or organization made multiple small requests that are escalating? Have they given you unrequested gifts or favors before asking for something significant? Are they consistently creating urgency around their offers? Do they frequently reference what others are doing to pressure your decisions? Recognizing patterns helps you see manipulation as a system rather than isolated incidents. A colleague who occasionally asks for help is different from a colleague who systematically gives you small gifts before requesting large favors. A company running one urgent sale is different from a company whose website always shows countdown timers that reset. Patterns also reveal intent. Random acts of generosity look different from strategic investments in future obligations. Genuine scarcity happens occasionally. Manufactured scarcity is constant. When you notice the pattern, you understand you're not responding to a single request, but to a calculated influence campaign. Exit. If pressured, the final and most critical step is giving yourself permission to walk away when pressure continues despite your use of the previous 4 steps. If you've analyzed the request, waited before deciding, asked independent questions, recognized a pattern, and the other party responds by increasing pressure rather than respecting your decision-making process, you should exit the situation entirely. This is where most people fail. They've identified the manipulation, they've done their research, they recognize the pattern, but they still feel obligated to continue engaging, to give the person a chance, to not be rude by walking away. That social conditioning is precisely what manipulators exploit. You are never obligated to continue a conversation, negotiation, or relationship with someone who refuses to respect your boundaries. Legitimate opportunities don't evaporate because you took time to think. Healthy relationships don't punish you for making careful decisions. Pressure that escalates when you try to slow down is confirmation that someone values their goal more than your well-being. Walking away feels difficult because it means accepting that you might miss out, that the other person might be disappointed or angry, that you might be wrong about your suspicions. But staying engaged with someone actively manipulating you guarantees a worse outcome than the uncertainty of walking away. The AUARE framework works because it creates space between stimulus and response, the space where conscious choice lives. Influence techniques collapse that space, making request and compliance feel simultaneous and inevitable. By systematically expanding that space through analysis, waiting, questioning, pattern recognition, and willingness to exit, you reclaim the autonomy these techniques are designed to steal. Practice this framework in low-stakes situations first. Use it when shopping, when someone asks for small favors, when you see marketing messages. The more you practice recognizing influence techniques and applying AWARE, the more automatic it becomes, until protecting yourself from manipulation requires no more effort than protecting yourself from obvious physical threats. You cannot eliminate influence from your life. You will always be surrounded by people and organizations trying to shape your decisions. But you can choose whether that influence operates with your awareness and consent or against your knowledge and interests. The difference between being influenced and being manipulated is the presence or absence of your conscious, informed choice. These 5 techniques, escalating commitment, manufactured consensus, false obligation, anchored perception, and artificial scarcity, will be used on you again tomorrow, probably multiple times. The question is whether you'll recognize them happening or whether you'll make decisions you later regret without understanding why you agreed. You now have the knowledge and the framework. What you do with them is your choice, and that's exactly how it should be.